I can't help but say this. Sometimes I have to pinch myself and say, am I in a parliament where there's government benches and opposition benches? Because I've listened to a half a dozen speeches or so, 5, maybe half a dozen, from opposition or government TDs from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, lashing you out of it, lashing previous governments out of it, lashing previous ministers out of it for this scandal. But they're still all in the parties that are responsible for it. They're still in Fine Gael and still in Fianna Fáil, even though they're condemning the behaviour of ministers and previous parties for upholding what was done to people in nursing homes and people with disability in long-term care. And it is a scandal, and it will be remembered by the population. And I suspect that the reason they're so strong in their condemnation is because they understand that the older persons are the ones who vote. The grey vote is important to them, and they don't want to lose it in their constituency. But I do think it's hypocrisy. It's absolute hypocrisy, and the least they could do is have a backbenchers revolt against the report from the Attorney-General and ensure that this is changed and something happens. That's the very least they could do. Mairead Enright said something very clear in her article in the Journal. She said, the state is a peculiar defendant. The plaintiff is the protector as well as the opponent, and that should mean that the state must behave as a model litigant in cases against ordinary citizens, but it hasn't. And as has been said by all the deputies here, it has been a David and Goliath story where the state has taken the most vulnerable, the weakest, the poorest, the sickest, the ones without the intellectual ability or the physical ability to be able to challenge the state on an equal par. This is definitely the David and Goliath story of the century as far as the Irish state is concerned, and it has been repeated in other cases. But here I just want to call out something that the Disability Federation of Ireland are saying. The line taken by the state to stop the disability maintenance payment on admission to long-term care and subsequent legal approach and lack of state action to address this discrepancy is particularly distressing when the people affected were often living with significant disability and not in a position to advocate for themselves. And they are now calling for the identification of the 12,000 or so who are impacted through a planned review, and this number can be confirmed through historical records. A trust needs to be established through this process and undertaken in a transparent and timely way with appropriate communication to those who are impacted and their families. And an examination of this issue handled in intervening years has been inadequate. A process of statutory repayment needs to be put in place. And I think Deputy Pauline Tully came up with a great idea there. Let the state pursue those who manufacture defective blocks and gave us over 100,000 apartments and homes and the Mica scandal in Donegal. Pursue them and get the cash that you're so preciously minding on behalf of the taxpayer back into the coffers of the state so that you can look after people with disabilities, people too old and sick to defend themselves in nursing homes. Let the state pursue the religious orders and the church who have underpaid by a huge amount their alleged and supposed and asked contribution to redress scheme for historical abuse cases. That's a brilliant idea, and if the state would do that, then they would prove themselves not to be a Goliath, but actually to be trying to treat all people and all children of the nation who live in this state equally. But that ain't going to happen. I know it's not going to happen, and you and everybody else here know it's not going to happen. Instead, the Attorney-General, in the most class-biased nature of any report from the Irish state, makes a defence, and it's not just a legal defence, it's a political defence for the legacy that we're here today talking about. And he is saying that the state litigation strategy that they had to have in order to protect the state coffers is not sinister or abnormal in any way. Well, if it's a secret litigation strategy that was used against vulnerable and poor people and it's not abnormal, then it must be normal. And if it is normal, then that's a huge class bias fault on behalf of the state against the people who dwell in this country. He also goes on to say that any suggestion that a secret litigation strategy is in some way improper betrays significant unfamiliarity with the civil litigation process. Of course it does. I'm a deputy in this House. I'm not familiar with the civil litigation process. How is somebody with an intellectual or a physical disability meant to be familiar with the civil litigation process? Or somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia living in a nursing home meant to be familiar with the civil litigation process? I think the state has gone beyond what it tries to do here. And when Leo Varadkar said that we have not a legal leg to stand on, he was absolutely right. And when the government says that, when the government says that the state had a responsibility to do what is right, but it also had to protect the taxpayer and a balance had to be struck between the past and the future. Well, I think the balance has not been struck. And I hope that you'll fall over on both legs, losing your balance, because what you've done here is absolutely outrageous, that you're standing over it is outrageous, and I hope that those grey voters and others really bring the chickens home to roost and put you out of office.